What if I told you that one of the most recognizable restaurant brands in America isn't really known for its food? Instead, it built its identity around something far more unconventional. And now, that very identity might be the reason it's struggling to survive. For decades, Hooters stood out in a crowded industry. It wasn't just another place to grab wings or watch a game. It created an experience, one that was instantly recognizable, widely talked about, and, at times, deeply controversial. The brand became famous for its upbeat servers, signature uniforms, and a vibe that blended casual dining with entertainment in a way few others dared to attempt. And for a long time, that formula worked. But today, things look very different. In recent years, the company has been facing serious challenges. Locations have been closing, financial pressure has been mounting, and questions are being raised about whether the brand can adapt to a changing world. At one point, the chain operated hundreds of locations across the United States. Now, that number has been steadily shrinking, with dozens of underperforming restaurants shutting their doors. Even more concerning, financial reports revealed massive debt, hundreds of millions of dollars, which ultimately pushed the company into bankruptcy proceedings. While the brand isn't disappearing overnight, it's clear that major changes are coming. So what happened? How does a company that once dominated its niche begin to lose its grip? That's exactly what we're going to explore in this video. Over the next few sections, we'll break down the key reasons behind the decline of Hooters, from economic challenges and shifting consumer behavior to internal decisions and brand identity struggles. Because the truth is, this isn't just a story about one restaurant chain. It's a case study in how quickly things can change when a business fails to evolve with its environment. Let's start with something that often gets overlooked: factors outside the company's control. Like many businesses in the casual dining space, Hooters has had to navigate a series of economic setbacks over the years. The late 2000s recession hit the restaurant industry hard as people began cutting back on discretionary spending. Dining out became less frequent, and brands that relied on consistent traffic started to feel the pressure. Although the economy eventually recovered, not every company bounced back equally, and Hooters never fully regained its previous momentum. Then came another major disruption: the global pandemic. Restaurants across the world faced unprecedented challenges, from temporary closures to reduced capacity and changing customer habits. For a brand like Hooters, which relies heavily on in-person dining and atmosphere, the impact was especially severe. To stay afloat during that period, the company took on significant financial obligations. While that may have helped in the short term, it also added long-term pressure that would later become difficult to manage. And the challenges didn't stop there. In recent years, rising costs have made operating a restaurant more expensive than ever. Food prices have increased, labor costs have gone up, and inflation has forced many consumers to rethink how they spend their money. As a result, fewer people are choosing traditional sit-down dining, instead opting for quicker and more affordable alternatives. This shift has created a tough environment not just for Hooters, but the entire casual dining sector. Several well-known chains have struggled under similar conditions, proving that this isn't an isolated issue, it's part of a broader industry trend. However, while external pressures explain part of the story, they don't tell the whole picture. Because beyond the economy, competition, and rising costs, there are deeper issues at play, ones tied directly to the brand itself. And that's where things start to get even more interesting. If external pressures set the stage for Hooters' decline, then internal challenges and public perception help explain why the brand struggled to recover. Because unlike many other restaurant chains, Hooters hasn't just faced business challenges, it has also spent decades navigating controversy. From its very beginning, the brand leaned into a bold and provocative identity. That approach helped it stand out, but it also placed it under constant scrutiny. Over the years, there have been numerous legal disputes and public criticisms involving workplace practices, discrimination claims, and inappropriate conduct. While many companies deal with lawsuits from time to time, Hooters seemed to attract a level of controversy that consistently kept it in the spotlight. One particularly bizarre incident often cited involved a promotional contest where expectations didn't match reality, leading to backlash and legal trouble. Situations like this didn't just cost money, they also chipped away at public trust. And that's the real issue. Because in today's world, reputation matters more than ever. Consumers are increasingly mindful of the brands they support. They care about company values, workplace culture, and social responsibility. For a business that has long been associated with controversy, maintaining a positive image becomes an uphill battle. Over time, this has led some customers to avoid the brand altogether, while others view it as outdated or out of touch with modern expectations. But even if reputation wasn't a factor, Hooters would still be facing another major challenge: competition. It's easy to forget now, but Hooters was once a pioneer. It helped popularize a style of restaurant that combined sports, casual dining, and a unique service model. For years, it had a clear identity and very few direct competitors. That didn't last. As the concept proved successful, other businesses quickly entered the space, often refining or modernizing the idea. One notable competitor is Twin Peaks, which built a similar atmosphere but with updated branding and rapid expansion. Over time, it has grown into a strong alternative, attracting many of the same customers. At the same time, the chicken wing market, once a major strength for Hooters, has become incredibly crowded. Chains like Buffalo Wild Wings and Wingstop have expanded aggressively, opening hundreds or even thousands of locations. These competitors didn't just match Hooters, they surpassed it in scale, convenience, and in some cases, food quality and variety. That creates a serious problem. Because when your core product is no longer unique, you're forced to compete on other factors: price, speed, or overall experience. And in those areas, newer brands often have the advantage. They're designed for modern consumers, with streamlined operations, strong takeout systems, and heavy investment in digital ordering. Hooters, on the other hand, has struggled to keep up with these shifts. There was an attempt to adapt. The company introduced a fast casual concept focused on takeout wings, aiming to compete more directly with modern dining trends. On paper, it seemed like a smart move: simpler operations, lower costs, and broader appeal. But in reality, the expansion never gained significant traction. Only a small number of locations were opened, and the concept failed to become a meaningful part of the business. Which brings us to a critical point. Hooters is no longer just competing in one category, it's competing in several at once. It's trying to hold on to its identity as a dine-in experience while also attempting to adapt to a world that increasingly values speed and convenience. And balancing those two things is incredibly difficult, because the very elements that once made the brand special, its atmosphere, its service style, its identity, don't always translate well in today's fast-paced, delivery-driven market. But perhaps the biggest challenge of all isn't competition or controversy. It's something even more fundamental. Hooters is no longer entirely sure what it wants to be. At this point, the story becomes less about the market and more about what was happening inside the company itself. Because one of the most overlooked reasons behind the struggles of Hooters is something that affects many large businesses over time: changing ownership and shifting leadership. When Hooters first started back in the early 1980s, it was founded by a small group of entrepreneurs with a simple but unconventional idea. They didn't have extensive restaurant experience, but they had a clear vision, and, more importantly, they were consistent in how they executed it. That consistency helped the brand grow. However, as the company expanded and became more valuable, ownership structures began to change. At one point, the original founders sold key rights to the brand for tens of millions of dollars, while still maintaining control over some locations. On the surface, this might seem like a normal business move, but it introduced a level of complexity that would grow over time. because once multiple groups are involved, alignment becomes difficult. Different owners often have different priorities. Some focus on long-term brand building, while others are more concerned with short-term financial returns. And when leadership changes hands repeatedly, strategies can shift just as quickly. That's exactly what happened here. Over the years, Hooters went through several ownership transitions, including deals involving private investment firms. Each transition brought new leadership, new ideas, and new directions, but instead of creating stability, it often led to inconsistency. Plans were introduced, then reversed. Strategies were tested, then abandoned, and in the process, time, money, and momentum were lost. What makes this situation particularly interesting is that not all Hooters locations were affected equally. A smaller group of restaurants, still operated by the original founders, continued to run independently, and according to reports, these locations actually performed significantly better than many of the others, sometimes generating nearly double the sales. Why? Because they stayed closer to the original formula. They focused on consistency and food quality, service, and overall experience, while other locations experimented with changes that didn't always resonate with customers. This created a kind of split identity within the brand itself. On one side, you had locations trying to evolve, adapt, and sometimes reinvent the concept. On the other, you had locations sticking to what had worked for decades. And when customers encounter that kind of inconsistency, it can weaken the overall brand. Think about it. If you visit one location and have a great experience, but then visit another and find it completely different food, different service, different atmosphere, it becomes harder to trust the brand as a whole. Consistency is one of the most important factors in the restaurant industry, and without it, even a well-known name can start to lose its appeal. Now, with recent restructuring efforts underway, there are plans for the original ownership group to take control of a much larger portion of the business. If that happens, they'll be responsible for managing far more locations than ever before. That could be an opportunity, but it also comes with risk. Scaling a business while maintaining quality is never easy. What works for a smaller group of restaurants doesn't always translate perfectly to a larger operation. It requires strong systems, clear leadership, and a unified vision. And that leads us directly into the next major issue. Because beyond ownership changes and operational inconsistencies, there's a deeper question that Hooters has been struggling to answer for years. What exactly is this brand supposed to be today? Is it a sports bar, a family-friendly restaurant, an adult-themed dining experience, or something else entirely? This lack of clarity has created what many would call an identity crisis. At the heart of everything we've discussed, the financial struggles, the competition, the leadership changes, there's one issue that ties it all together: an identity crisis. Because for decades, Hooters has walked a very fine line between different audiences, and that balancing act has become harder and harder to maintain. From the very beginning, the brand was built around a concept that stood out. It leaned into a bold, slightly provocative image that made it instantly recognizable. That identity helped it grow quickly, attract attention, and carve out a unique space in the restaurant industry. But that same identity also came with limitations. As times changed, so did consumer expectations. Modern audiences are more diverse, more aware, and often more selective about where they choose to spend their money. What may have once felt edgy or entertaining can now be seen by some as outdated or even uncomfortable. This creates a difficult situation, because if Hooters tries to stay true to its original image, it risks alienating a broader, more modern audience. But if it moves too far in the opposite direction, trying to become more family-friendly or mainstream, it risks losing the very identity that made it successful in the first place. And this isn't just a theoretical problem. We've already seen it play out in real time. Over the years, the company has made multiple attempts to shift its image. At one point, there was a push to focus more on sports and food, toning down some of the elements that made the brand controversial. The goal was to make the restaurants feel more welcoming to families and a wider range of customers. But then, not long after, there were moves that seemed to go in the opposite direction, updates that leaned even further into the brand's original, more provocative style. These back-and-forth decisions only added to the confusion. So what's the result? A brand that isn't fully committed to either direction. And that's a problem. Because in today's competitive market, clarity is everything. The most successful brands know exactly who they are and who they're for. They communicate that clearly, and they stay consistent over time. Hooters, on the other hand, has been sending mixed signals. For some people, it's still seen as an adult-oriented novelty, something you visit occasionally, but not a place you'd regularly bring family or friends. For others, it's simply another wing restaurant, competing in a space where many alternatives offer similar food without the added controversy. That makes it difficult to grow, because when a brand tries to appeal to everyone, it often ends up strongly appealing to no one. Now, to be fair, there are efforts being made to address this. With the possibility of more unified leadership and a clearer direction, there's hope that the company can stabilize and redefine its identity. Some plans suggest a shift toward a more inclusive, family-friendly environment, one that focuses more on food quality, service, and the overall dining experience. But even if those changes are implemented successfully, there's still a major challenge ahead: changing public perception. Because once a brand becomes known for something, that image can be incredibly difficult to reshape. It takes time, consistency, and a lot of effort to convince people to see it differently. And even then, there's no guarantee it will work. So where does that leave Hooters? Is this a brand that can reinvent itself and adapt to a new era? Or is it an example of a concept that was perfectly suited for its time, but struggles to fit into the present? The answer isn't entirely clear, but one thing is certain. The story of Hooters is a powerful reminder of how important it is for businesses to evolve, not just in response to competition or economic pressure, but in how they define themselves. Because in the end, a company's identity isn't just part of their brand, it is the brand. And if that identity becomes unclear, everything else starts to follow.